Greetings everyone, welcome to my first author commentary. I started working on Planet Ripple very late 2013, early 2014-ish, mostly concept art and the basic outline for the story for a couple years. I started making the pages in 2016 and released the first 2 books in 2017, originally planned to be one monstrous 310 page book, but I realized that would cost like $50 per copy, so I split it down the middle. Now most of these videos will be exclusive to patrons in the long run, but I will cover the first 8 chapters for free. Volume 1. There will be spoilers, so if you want to read it and then come back to this, you can download the PDF for free on itch, which I'll link in the description. The way I see it, if an entire book isn't enough to hook somebody, they were never really going to be into it. A book is plenty of time to tell a good story. So let's dive into Log 1. Regret. Now keep in mind, this is the first page in the entire series. Aside from the fairly optimistic cover, this is the first thing people see. Darkness, drowning, loss. With these first couple pages, I really wanted to sell just how much had been lost in the flood. It's a whole world down there, and all we see of the new world, our first glimpse, are these 2 tiny figures at the top of the page, barely noticeable. And it's a while before we even see their faces. All we see are their suits, which, one's a fairly believable, old-timey looking diving suit, and the other's basically a submarine with hands and feet. It's a very alien world. Like, it was already pretty far in the future when the flood happened. Even the buildings aren't like today's. For one, they'd have to be made of much stronger or just very different materials and construction to be standing as long as they have. The flood was thousands of years ago. Like, our own Titanic will be gone in another few decades. It's already turning into mush. And you can even see the architecture of these buildings is a bit different. But nothing lasts forever, and just touching down on this one seems to have sealed the fate of these characters. I'm always fascinated by art depicting what the world might look like if humanity was just to disappear overnight. After a few years, you'd have overgrown cities, green buildings, animals claiming the territory for their own, which is what we see here, just underwater. You have a bit of sediment, vegetation, barnacles, but then we see the table and chairs. Now, if I made this chapter today, I would make the furniture a different color just to help them stand out better. I would also do the speech bubbles differently. Like when they're talking over the radio, I'd add some zigzags or spikes to indicate static or noise. But here I just made them slightly bluer than the other speech bubbles. These were the early days. And we finally see our first human. And it's not even the protagonist, it's her guardian, her mother. And when we finally do get our first look at Minnow herself, we barely see any of her, just her eyes. Now with this first drawing of Minnow, there's so much I wanted to communicate. Just through the shape of her eyebrows. Like, she is fairly wide-eyed and curious, but not excited by any of this. She's kind of indifferent to it. She just doesn't understand what she's looking at. Like, even just seeing this bright yellow door, she assumes it must be a vault, but it's just a kid's room because that's a color a little kid would like. She doesn't get things like that. Not for a while, anyway. So they cut through the door with a welding torch that, again, is very alien looking. And this room, considering how long this has been left here, it's remarkably preserved. That bed, the pillow, the mattress, the sheets, they should have disintegrated long ago, but they've just been left there all this time in this almost sealed off room. And of course they do disintegrate the second Minnow touches them. Now here's a fun bit of foreshadowing. If someone hasn't taken a good look at the back cover and doesn't understand what's up with Minnow's limbs, they might see this dialogue and think, oh, her arm's just stiff because it's achy. And even Andrea's dialogue is kind of misleading. Oh, no, don't swear, we'll stop at the doctor's when we get back. But in this future, where so many people are cyborgs, doctor is just another word for engineer. They've become synonymous. Of all the creatures that could have survived the flood but didn't, this is what Minnow finds as a stuffed toy. The giraffe has become an interesting symbol of Planet Ripple, of endurance, of innocence. There's sentimental meaning attached to it, but also spiritual, like rooted in mythology. But we'll cover that in later chapters. But right now, for Minnow, this is like finding a dinosaur. She doesn't even believe Andrea first. What? There's no way animals like this were ever real. It's just not like anything she's ever seen. She doesn't even care about it. She's about to throw it away. It only starts caring once Andrea tells her, no, that could go to somebody else. That could make some kid happy. Which shows that Minnow is empathetic, but also impulsive and kind of extreme. Because just as disaster strikes, she goes 180 from couldn't care less about this thing to risking their lives for it. as she dives back into the abyss to get it. And, it costs her almost everything. Now, a loss like this doesn't usually happen this early in a story. Conventional wisdom would be to, you'll build up the relationship with the characters, and then have Andrea die at the end of the second act, or 3/4 through the story. But with this scene, I wanted to establish what a dangerous world this is, how easily things can go awry, and you can lose everything, which was a big risk. Because I only had about, 10 pages, only about 5 of which we actually see these characters, to establish their connection, what they mean to each other, how Andrea is basically Minno's mom, and that she'd do anything to protect Minno. And it's very easy for a scene like that to end up corny, just feeling totally unearned, algorithmically generated drama, just begging for you to feel something. So I was meticulous with the dialogue, with the gestures, with the pacing, to tell us everything we need to get the gist of it. And then as it dawns on Minno what she's just done, that there's no getting out of this for Andrea, we get those parting words. Don't get sucked down. Now, not every reader is gonna get the full meaning of this their first time reading through. You could take it literally, which Minno does, causing her so much pain in the long run. But while she doesn't literally get sucked down, her spirit does. I try to give people a good idea of how this would be animated. My comics, a lot of the time I try to make them feel like storyboards, which isn't like many American comics. It's one thing when you're self-published. If I need a chapter to be 35 pages, I can do that. If I only need 15 pages, even a dozen pages, I can make a short chapter. Whatever's needed for the story to flow just right. But with so many mainstream comics, especially superhero ones, everything has to fit into 22, sometimes just 20 pages. So sometimes you have scenes that are needlessly drawn out, and others that are really congested. But a scene like this needs a moment to breathe, as we slowly pan up from the end of that cable up to Minno. In the moments of Andrea's death, there would be little to no fanfare. There'd be a little music at this point, some bleak electronic murmuring playing over the distorted mumblings of the ship's crew above. And then boom, title screen. And we jump ahead 7 years later, making that entire first scene a flashback, which kind of makes Andrea a ghost, because her entire presence in this comic is posthumous. We never actually meet Andrea in person, we only see her in Minno's memories. It's like we're getting to know her secondhand. Now if I could ever license this song, this is where I would play Black Celebration by Depeche Mode. If ever there was a theme song for the earliest chapters of this series, that would be it. It's a great song about depression and just what an accomplishment it is to make it through the slog of another day, and then another day, and so on. At least that's the meaning I take from it. Music informs a lot of the atmosphere of my work. Another thing about atmosphere, color. Color is so important, and some comic artists will tell you whatever you do, don't have more than like a couple panels on a page be the same color, or all just blend together. But in my experience, color can be used to make entire scenes stand out. Color shows how a character's feeling, what kind of world they're living in. When Andrea dies, all the color's sucked out. That's how Minno feels. Now we get these vibrant blues and lavenders showing Minno's home from outside. It looks pretty inviting. But then we're assaulted by brown and orange and red. All these colors that communicate rust and filth and claustrophobia. And this is where the lyrics would kick in. Let's have a black celebration. Again, trying to make this like a storyboard, the way we zoom into the bowels of the ship, and then slowly pan down from the ceiling fan to our first shot of Minno in the present. Tonight. And this is our first real look at Minno. And these last 7 years have not been kind to her. She managed to save the giraffe at least, but her world's just fallen apart. I still have the lines for this page. It's really surreal looking back at it, realizing what an iconic scene it would end up being. So she goes through her daily routine. She has barely any money. She uses disinfectant wipes to treat her sores. To celebrate the fact that we've seen the back of another black day. Sorry, I know my singing is terrible, but I'm dead serious. This whole stretch, since we jump to the present, is an opening credits sequence. No dialogue, just a montage showing a typical day for Minno. She has a job, at least, cleaning toilets. By the way, this was inspired by an actual plunger that my grandpa once got. It was a fake rifle with a plunger on the end of it, and I assumed, well, obviously you pull the trigger and it plunges. Now, it's just an aesthetic, but I thought, wouldn't that be neat if there was actually something like that? Now, Planet Ripple isn't necessarily for kids, but I kept it as technically kid-friendly as I could. There's no swearing, there's no intense, violent gore or whatever, but with this scene, I needed to make a point. I needed to take the gloves off. And here, on the last page of this first chapter, we see the ugliest word in the entire series, the Arsler, which I and too many other autistic people have been called. Because so many other people, they think that's what we are. They think that calling somebody autistic is just the politically correct, polite way of calling them this. I've been called that. If you're autistic, you've been called that. And it's not okay. But after everything we've seen, I figured this was the perfect way to end the chapter. Something to take us away from all the bigger sci-fi stuff and ground it in something real. Hint at actual social issues and attitudes that affect people like Minnow. Because yes, in case you haven't figured it out by now, Minnow is autistic. Very autistic. Which makes it all the more easy for people to blame her for what happened to Andrea. And with no other voices to counter this rhetoric, she just believes it, she internalizes it. And that's where we leave her in this first chapter. So, what have we learned about Minnow? Well, at this time, she's a little naive, and impulsive, and easily victimized. But it won't always be this way. And over the 40-something chapters that have been released so far at the time of this upload, you're gonna see everything change. Minnow's life, Minnow herself, the way people see her, her place in the world. It's gonna be a journey, but it took a lot to get there. That's it for now. If you want to support my work, consider my books, which are all available on Amazon and Itch. There's also my Patreon, where you can see videos like this and some other projects coming up a week before anyone else. See you next vlog. Toodles.